we are going to operate from a humility about what is known and about how it is discovered. And so seeing this suspended cranial model here, and notice what has been removed here. Okay? Skin, nerves, fluids, muscles, fascia. And of course, what has been removed is life itself, the living organism. And so bone has changed its quality and texture. But Sutherland saw this suspension of bones and said, look at that relationship between the temporal bone and the parietal bone. Look at how it is beveled. Look at how that overlap happens. It almost looks to me like the gills of a fish. Then he made kind of an intuitive leap. He said, what if that overlap of bones indicated motion? This was his understanding, that there is motion, and that motion corresponded to something like a respiratory mechanism. There is nothing wrong with that thought. As far as I can tell, I have associative inferences like that all the time. And part of the fun of being a body worker is that, like, you get to hold these thoughts and see where they take you. It's quite another thing to say, I had this insight, this question, what about if there's a respiratory mechanism? And then to put your hands on someone with that imagery, notice things happening and saying, whoa, I'm noticing kind of a breathing quality here, just like I thought with that beveled thing. I must have been right. I think the assumption Sutherland made was that his palpatory sense was an unfiltered way of engaging with the living system. But what we now know, and we know it very well, is that our conscious perception of the world passes through many stages of perceptual filtering before we can even access it consciously, right? This is why we can prime ourselves to perceive things in a selective way. What I want to say in a spacious humility way is that I think that Sutherland had a valuable insight, and I think that caused him to tune in to something in the organism which I think is valuable to tune into. But I have a lot of humility about what that something is. and so I want to put a little space today between my direct experience, which is really important, and also the ultimate physiologic reality of the body, which is also really important. We know there are fluids. We know the fluids move. We know that fluid movement is somehow important to the organism. We don't know how that internal reality filters into our perception. And it's tricky territory for us to base any claims about that based on just our hands. However, having said that, even Sutherland was more interested in direct experience than he was about making physiologic claims. He was trying to use metaphors more than we give him credit for. And so here is a writing 50 years later from Sutherland in 1950. This is right at the end of his working career. And over that time, Sutherland took this whole way of working into a more and more deep place, and he had a progression going from thinking about bones and articulations to doing less and less, and to thinking more and more about language, which now we would call energetic or at times almost spiritual. That's to say, he would be talking about liquid light or a sense of electrical thunderstorms inside the body. This is something he was feeling. So you can see the development of his palpatory sense, and there's a lot of beauty in that, right? There's also a certain humility in his spirit throughout, which I think we should appreciate before we get too attached to the lineage. Realize that he himself was humble in ways. So here's a story he tells about a bird, a baby bird that he found stunned and injured. And I'll just read it to you here. A flock of baby wrens, just out from their nest and learning how to utilize their wings, flew into my garage. One little wren became alarmed by my sudden appearance and, in great fright, bumped its tiny head upon a beam in the doorway. The little babe fell to the floor, apparently lifeless. I lacked the anatomical knowledge of where or how to register the pulse, but the respiration was absent. Even the tiny head was less than 2 centimeters in measurement. I picked the baby up and gently flexed the tiny head upon what were probably the facets of the atlas. There followed a tiny click, indicating something returning to normal position. That's his osteopathic assumption. I pictured this as a ligamentous reduction of what may have been an occipito-atlantal ligamentous articular strain. Read that sentence back for a moment. I pictured this as a ligamentous reduction of what may have been an occipito-atlantal ligamentous articular strain. Right there, he's building in humility. He's saying, I pictured it. I don't know, but that's what I felt. The tiny wren regained consciousness and turned from its side to a sitting posture. The eyes opened and respiration became very apparent. 30 minutes later, our little patient flew away into the lilac bushes to join its flock without leaving even its tiny bill in return for the professional services rendered. Yet I somehow know that the tiny wren was grateful and may return in the springtime to build a nest in my backyard. I shall listen for its cheerful song and hear it say, even though a tiny wren fall by the wayside, the Father knoweth. I think this is Sutherland being playful. And so I think we can reliably approach it the same way, playfully, and with a certain amount of just imagery and owning the things we are picturing, the role we play in generating the perceptions that we have.